All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get going here. My name is Robert Ortega, and I'm the Director of Member Services at Public Safety Retirement. I also have here the outstanding, I'm sure you all know him or have talked to him, but we have Larry Lopez here as well, part of the Member Services team. Yes, he is definitely a savior in our agency. But today we're going to be talking a little bit on operational side of things, dealing with employer reporting issues, dealing with a portal, some of the items you might encounter, how do you troubleshoot them, some of the frequently asked questions that probably employers ask Larry on a regular basis. So he's actually going to be the Obi-Wan Kenobi today and share on the information today. I'm just kind of here for some moral support and to answer any additional questions that may come through. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce again Larry Lopez, and he'll take it from there.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, good morning, everybody. We have a slideshow prepared for you. It's more of a high-level overview. A lot of you will recognize some of the information, and then, of course, we'll get into a little more specifics as we go along. So, of course, you know myself and Robert. I'm an active member specialist, and I'm here to help. I'm the guy you guys want to call. Getting right into it, what we want to do today is just provide you with like I said, an overview. We're going to identify some of the common issues. Everybody has one-offs, but we're going to identify some of the common issues to make it so that you guys can all handle what comes up more regularly without feeling like you're all alone. We're going to give you some best practices and some tips and things that'll get you through it. And then real briefly at the end, I'll just set some expectations so that you guys know what we're doing in order to improve on the systems that we've gotten at the moment. So moving on, we're going to identify some issues here. These are the most common issues that will impact when you're performing uploads and creating invoices. It says incomplete, inaccurate, or otherwise erroneous member statuses. The biggest conflict comes with Social Security numbers. It's real easy to kind of fat finger it and get the wrong number on your hiring and get the correct number in your payroll uploads. And that conflict will generate two error messages. One, we're not expecting a contribution from one, and the other, we're not receiving a contribution that we were expecting. The other is members who just aren't in the right status. Maybe they were out on some sort of leave, and so we're not expecting a contribution, but now they're back, and so you do have contributions to upload for them. I think that, honestly, with the transition of having employers enter the members' data into our portal through the demographic screen, it's really going to cut down on those types of conflicts. And well, it takes the responsibility off of us, so we don't have the opportunity to make that mistake. Next are rate errors. So, of course, different members, different tiers, even some in the same tiers have different rates. When you guys hire a member, generally speaking, you'll ask, and they'll tell, or they'll volunteer to tell you what their tier is, what rate they're used to paying. They may not tell you that they've refunded, or they may not tell you that something else has changed in our system that they don't have the rate that they're giving you. That's going to be probably the majority of our rate errors, and ultimately speaking, it's just a matter of reaching out to us, and between yourselves and our staff, we have to figure out where that member really belongs. From there on, the good thing about the new system is that once it's fixed for good. Getting there is kind of a trouble spot sometimes, though. Next, we have formatting errors. Code errors are probably the least of which, but I thought I should mention it simply because it's a really easy mistake to make, and I've seen it where you type in a code and just out of habit we hit the space bar. That can cause a problem. The other thing is if you're uploading contributions for one particular pay period and you've selected a different pay period, so you may be making up contributions for a member. In and around the conflicting pay period end and pay dates, ultimately, just so that everybody has the same pay date for the same pay period, can resolve that. And then extra lines. This one's kind of a ghost. If you populate your upload and literally just tab over to another field, I don't know if you noticed, but there are 13 fields, and or excuse me, there are 12. If you populate anything in the 13th field, even if you delete it, when you go to upload it, the Excel or the spreadsheet, it'll remember that as sort of an artifact, and it saves that. And so literally, it thinks you're trying to give it extra information, and it stops. It generates an error message. So there's, I don't know if anyone is here that I've actually shown this to, but you can delete those extra lines of information, and it allows you to proceed without any, it's deceivingly simple to do. Next is member statuses. So like I said, just to get into a little more detail, when you go to enter a member through our portal, you'll get a successful message. In this case, this one has the failure. So a lot of times we're not paying much attention. I know I've done it myself, where I just hit OK because it gave me a confirmation message after I entered it. And then when you go to perform the upload, it doesn't work. We're not expecting that contribution. The best thing to remember is just remember that it'll say successful if you've entered the data accurately, and then you won't have that problem when it comes to performing the upload. Inaccurate data, like I mentioned, the biggest culprit is Social Security numbers, and ultimately speaking, trying to report contributions for a member whose Social Security is either inaccurate in our system or inaccurate in your data is going to always stop the process. And as you know, you can't contribute for anyone until you've contributed for everyone. And just ultimately speaking, their Social Security numbers have to be correct and their status has to be correct. There's a brief note in here where members termed before the pay period end date, and our system does allow you to contribute for a member who has been terminated. Their status is terminated. They terminated the first day or the second day of the pay period. The system will still allow you, once you've entered that, to contribute for that pay period. It'll actually require you to. And so the reason that I mentioned that is that other employers will not be able to hire that member. And so as long as you have them on your roster, the other employer won't be able to do it. And so if you do go in, as soon as a member terminates, you give them a terminated status, you'll still be, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks down the road, you'll still be able to process their contribution. And it'll allow their new employer to put them in and process their contributions as well. For incorrect Social Security number, it's like I said, it's just a matter of just following up. If a member is already in our system, you will receive the failed update when you try to hire that member, because we have that Social Security number and date of birth associated with a particular member. If that Social Security number is off, it'll take it thinking it's a new member. And then when you go to do your upload, it's going to say, we're not expecting that, we're expecting this other Social Security date of birth combination. I hope that makes sense. Next. These are the rate errors. Every fiscal year, you guys know, in July, the new rates come out. We try to make those available to you as soon as possible so you can budget and things like that. But ultimately speaking, the first of every fiscal year is when we start running into rate errors. And we post them all to our website. And we are working with our communications department to make sure that that's communicated more clearly to you. Hey, these are the rates. This is where you can find them. And then you shouldn't have any problems with that. Next are tier conflicts. So, for instance, you may have a Tier 1 member who laterals from one employer to your employment. If that member is a Tier 1 employee, he could still have one of two different rates. And so they don't necessarily know that. Strictly speaking, when when the time comes, we'll have a better employee lookup that'll give you better rates and better rate information for those members. I know it's still in process. It's still an ongoing thing, but we are working to improve the results that come from that. And in the meantime, just like I always say to you guys, just give us a call, and we can get it resolved pretty quickly. The enhancements, that's where I was going with that. And if you ever run into a problem that you don't think is in your data, then we do urge you to call, just because we are still working on our systems, and it may be something on our side. We're not perfect. We don't expect you guys to be. So just give us a call, and we'll be able to work on that. Okay. Formatting errors. Code errors. All codes are 4 characters, no extra spaces, things like that. You're probably all familiar with the DBCN contribution code, not DCBN or something like that. These are all just really simple mistakes that can be made. The majority of our larger employers, this process is automated, so once it's programmed incorrectly, you guys don't touch it anymore. So we generally don't run into that. But if you are one of the employers who you construct your upload yourselves, just be cautious. And if you run into a problem like that, just kind of peruse over your data and see if you've got a transposed letter or character. Like I was mentioning with pay period end dates, when you go through the process, you're selecting a pay period end date, and that pay date, if you have a member who's, say, terminated employment, you may have paid him on a different date. Ultimately speaking, our system doesn't like that. It likes more contiguous information. And so I know it may not be factually accurate, but so long as those all tie out, then you're not going to be running into any problems with that. I mentioned in this slide about adjustments that have a different pay period end date, and they will also have a different pay date. Because they're adjustments, and I'll get into it a little bit more later, but because they're adjustments, those are the one exception where you can have a pay period upload with a different pay period and pay date. And like I said, I'll get into more of that later. The extra lines. This generally only occurs with comma separated value spreadsheets or with Excel spreadsheets. It's almost impossible to do with the fixed width ones. But literally speaking, if you type anything in, you've got to delete that column or delete that row. Otherwise, our system will take it as you're trying to give it some more information, and it doesn't like it. So there are some little quick tricks that you can use in Excel that can help delete that information and then try the upload again. Obviously, if that doesn't work, then you'll have to give us a call. And the other is subtotals and grand totals. I know that a lot of employers will use this data. You're not just running your payroll for us. You're running it for for everything, for your insurance, for your Social Security contributions, and things like that. And so a lot of times you'll add totals and you'll total lines and columns. We just ask that you have to have those out of there. Otherwise, the system won't take it. And I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that. As far as adjustments are concerned, the first sentence kind of says it all for me. The best adjustment is one that doesn't need to be done. Strictly speaking, one thing that you want to keep in mind, and I've tried to stress this with everyone I've spoken with, it is every bit as important when the member earned his pay as how much he earned. So it's not, one is no more important than the other as far as how much he's contributing and when that contribution is for. And so a lot of times you may, if you think about that, you may find yourself doing more adjustments than you thought you would do, simply because a member wasn't paid for his full hours in a pay period before, and now you've got to make that up. Well, it has to be reported for that pay period. It has to contain the pay date for that pay period. Otherwise, again, you'll run into error messages and it won't take it. Especially when it comes to adjustments, because there are some subtle nuances in it, I would definitely advise giving us a call as soon as you have a discrepancy that has to do with an adjustment. There are I understand the reason that you would be compelled to make reporting not necessarily entirely accurate. We're telling you that we want this amount of money for this particular member, and our system does the math for you. And so when you do accept something that is not in your data, then that in and of itself, that means an adjustment's going to have to be done at a later date. So a lot of times you may have reporting for a member with other than normal rate contribution. Maybe it's you're making up a contribution from a previous pay period or something like that, and you've lumped it all together. Again, I hate to phrase it that way, not to game the system, but just because our system tells you, well, you were inaccurate, but we fixed it for you, doesn't mean that we fixed it correctly. Like I said, we're not any more perfect than you are, and so we may be reading from inaccurate data as well. The period for entering adjustments is the current and the last fiscal year. Ultimately speaking, we do want to make it so that you can adjust for more, because when you've got a member who goes to retire, there may be adjustments needed for more than just the last fiscal year. We are working on that, but at the current time, it is the current fiscal year and the one fiscal year prior that you can enter adjustments. Anything beyond that, you'll have to send it in for us to manually enter, and we'll wind up generating a separate invoice or drawing it from your prepay or whichever you decide to do. But yeah, anything outside of the current and the last fiscal year, we'll have to work together to get those done. When we do those types of adjustments, we do need to know things like, how would you like it paid? Do you want us to invoice you for it? Do you want us to take it from your prepay? Some of them are for, say, for instance, members who've gone out on military leave, and they're making up those contributions. They're making up their portion, you're making up your portion. In cases like that, it may be better to wait until the member has made all of their contributions up and then feed us one large adjustment, with all of the missing pay periods at once. Otherwise, you can, if it's within the last 2 fiscal years, you can go ahead and add it into your normal upload. And but again, if it's for like a year at a time and it was 2 years ago and you're making them up, we'll be making those. We'll be asking you to let us know, how do I want to pay for this? Do I want a separate invoice? Do I want to take them from prepay? How do I want to pay it? Looking at this adjustment here, this is more typical of adjustments that you might see where a member wasn't paid the proper amount for the prior pay period. In this particular instance, this gives you kind of an example, and those that use the Excel spreadsheets or the CSV files, you'll recognize this, where you've got all of your contributions for one particular pay period and everybody's pay dates match, but you've got one adjustment and it's for a prior pay period. That's exactly what it should look like. And it can be in the middle of your upload, or it can be at the end of it. Or like I said, if it's for the greater than one prior fiscal year, it'll be on its own separate sheet that you'll send to us and we'll get it entered. The key to remember here is that even if you're making up pay and you just paid it on this pay period, you'll need to use the previous pay date for that previous pay period in order to get it to go through. I think I kind of ran through that a little quick, but ultimately, it's the only way that we have at the moment to process your adjustments. And it just, like I said, it's equally important when that pay was earned or when these contributions were earned as how much they earned. And I think I got through that really quick. So that's the end of the slideshow. But I think I may want to ask if anybody has any questions. Here it comes. Please go ahead.
Really quick, going back to that adjustment. So you're saying that we shouldn't do a separate file when we have, like if we had a retro pay or something?
If it's for the same fiscal year or within the last, the one prior to that, then yeah, you can add it to your upload. You don't necessarily have to send it to us or anything, so long as you've got the rate correct for the, like if it's prior fiscal year. As long as you got the rate correct and the pay period and pay date represented properly, then yeah.
Just merging it to your
Yeah.
regular upload.
Okay, I'll get her and I'll come back to you.
I'm not sure if this is the correct setting for this question, so tell me if it isn't, but if you make a lump sum payment, like let's say 7/1, you're making the lump sum payment for that fiscal year, how does that affect the reporting side?
You mean it's a lump sum payment, like a prepay?
Yeah.
Well, that'll go into a prepay account that you'll see on your preview invoice page. And as you go along uploading pay periods, you'll draw from that. And it's important to remember there's a little checkbox that has to be checked if you accept the invoice. And that kind of goes back to any kind of information. If anything that you've uploaded is different, if it generates a rate error and it's telling you, this was a problem, but we fixed it, make sure that you understand what that problem is. If we fixed it accurately, then of course, go ahead and accept that invoice.
So it pretty much be like the credit, is that what you're
Yeah, those credit accounts. Yeah, the little checkboxes. Yeah. Robert?
Just to kind of follow up on that question, and for those of you who may not have heard the question that came up, the question was, how do lump sum payments affect this contribution upload process moving forward if you do an annual prepay funding of your contributions? The first step would obviously be to contact and work with our accounting and finance group, because we need to get an accounting of that to get into our portal. And if you're going to be relying on that prepaid account to truly pay for your contribution uploads and files and the invoices that you would get against those, what we would say is you would need to finalize that process first before you even begin your first upload, because if you don't, the problem is going to end up happening where you would do an upload, you would get an invoice that is requiring payment, and you as an employer were expecting your prepaid account to fund that invoice, and then there's a lot of behind the scenes accounting and adjustments that need to happen to ensure that invoice is paid so that there's no outstanding invoices, because we have two different processes. You have your process of uploading your data and your detail on contributions, both at the employee and employer level, and then there's the back-end contribution accounting to make sure that, hey, the detail that you all sent over, did we receive the payment against that particular pay period? So that would be your first step, is to make sure you work through that process first before you begin even your new fiscal year reporting. Great question. Do we have another question right here?
Yes.
Yeah, just going back, you were talking about how the final check date might be different.
Yes.
So only adjustments will have a different pay date. So the final check date, you do want us to game it a little?
Well, if you've paid that member, say you paid them out before the end of the day after they terminated, then yeah, it's for that particular pay period, and the system's only designed to accept one pay date for a particular pay period. Now, if it's an adjustment all by itself, you can send that in to us and we'll make the adjustment for it. It goes in manually. Unfortunately, it doesn't validate anything. It just, and this goes back to the checks and balances that we set on that. It takes whatever we give it internally. And so if there's a rate error, if the incorrect contribution is being made based on that particular pensionable salary, if I don't go through and look at the numbers, it'll take it. And we won't find it until the member retires. But that's a good question. Anybody else?
So if I happen to have a miscellaneous credit I don't think belongs to me, or should have been cleared with the whole Paul Crocker thing, is it finance I talk to?
We can start with finance. It may wind up being something else, but that's where we would start. And that's actually goes back to your question and ties back into what I was saying earlier. If anything doesn't tie out to what you guys are expecting to see, then stop, review what you have. Maybe you just had it in your head you were expecting something different. Maybe we've made a change, and it's not a correct change. And so if you don't see the available credit accounts, you should stop there and don't accept that invoice. If you don't see the right amounts, then that's kind of a lot to ask for you to calculate that every pay period. But it's not hard in hindsight. I mean, if you see the contributions that you've uploaded in the prior pay period, and you compare your existing balances, you can. It's not trigonometry or anything like that. The only other thing also is, where was I going with that? When you perform your upload and you see that my credit accounts aren't available, if you stop there, then that's going to avoid the problem that Robert was talking about, where all these other things have to happen in the background, starting with voiding that invoice and starting over. And then, again, it keeps you from having to re-upload that again a second time.
And so, and the second thing is, sometimes you have to send me that beautiful little box of history, the snapshot.
Oh, yeah.
It's when I put someone on leave or when they come off, because I can't see those. Is there anywhere else I can see those dates, or in your enhancements, are you going to include that?
Honestly, it's kind of a toss-up. I would love for all of you to be able to see everything that I see, and then I'd be out of a job. But giving you guys read-only access to that, I think, is one of the read-only access to as much of the members' information as possible is the goal.
I just feel bad calling you or emailing you all the time.
Sure, and
When I put this guy on leave and came off.
yeah, and at the same time, it's taking time off of your, that you could be performing other duties. I know that you all have different. You're not just hired just to work with PSPRS, so that is the goal. There is, it has to be prioritized. I know it's 2019 and maybe things should be a little different in our systems, but we're working on it. 2020. Man, there's the problem. Thank you. Anyone else? No? Oh, you got another one.
So, piggybacking on that, if we have an employee who's out on work comp, are we supposed to put them in as like a non-contributing member for the time that they are not?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it depends. It depends if the member is not going to be contributing, and it's a really simple answer. If the member is going to be contributing, he needs to stay in a contributory status, whether he's going to be contributing 66% of his pay or 2% or whatever. If he's not going to be making a contribution, he needs to be in a non-contributory status, and the system will remind you that when you go to do the upload.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll piggyback on that. Your question is, are you speaking with respect to, because I know that there is the supplemental benefit program under 38,966 or something like that, which is not a program that we manage. It just happens to coincide with our statutes. And basically, for those of you who may not be familiar with that, that law basically requires an employer to offer this supplemental benefit for those members who are on work-related industrial leave. And it's the whole intent of this statute is to keep that member whole during that time period if they qualify for the program. And so as part of that statute as well, it does say that the employer is responsible for the contributions, both employee and employer, during that time period as well, because again, the whole intent is to keep this person whole during this time frame, which would also include their pension during that time frame. And so to answer your question with respect to contributions, you wouldn't change their status, because from our perspective, they're still an active contributing member. So there's no need to put them, exactly, there's no need to put them in a leave without pay status. There's no need to put them in an industrial leave status, because those are statuses in our system that is a non-contributory status. So there's no changes that you would need to process at the demographic level to say that this person has changed, because in our eyes, they're still an active contributing member. You would still need to, though, break the contribution, both the portion that's employee and the portion that's employer, as you normally do in every normal payroll. So that would still need to happen.
Okay, so what we did was we processed it normally and then reimbursed the employee for the part that was the employee contribution.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know how on that end, how you do it, but from our perspective, we just need to see an employee.
Came through as like the two separate contributions.
Exactly.
Employee, one employer.
Exactly. Yeah, great question. Yes, another question, Kim.
Last time we had folks come back from a president tell us we had a form we did. So this time I just got a couple back. Can we just create the upload independently for each one, because they were each out like almost a year, over a year? And just do the contributions and let you know they're coming up and just send it up? and then ask you to e-bill us? Is that how you want to
Yeah,
handle it this time?
absolutely. If you want a distinction in the member, that's fine. As long as they're employed under the same covered type position, they're police or they're fire, or
Right.
then they can come together and we can upload it and invoice them together. If you want them invoiced separately,
I think
just
so.
for accounting purposes or audit or, yeah,
Different pay periods, they didn't go up and come back at the same time, I think it'd be cleaner.
absolutely.
That's okay with you?
And that's a personal preference. If others prefer to do it all together so that you're only paying one invoice, it's entirely up to you. We would prefer as much as possible consolidated, but it really, again, I mean, we're here to serve you. I mean, we're here to help you get these things done.
Yeah, they're all over
That's what
the
it
place.
takes.
I mean, I've had one out almost 2 years now, so we'd rather not hold them, we'd rather just balance them and get them out. And for the sheriff's office, it's gonna be easier if we're invoicing them separately.
Right. And this actually, what Robert's answer to your question as well, this helps to illustrate the distinction between the employer and the retirement system. You guys do what you do, and you guys do that better than we could. We're just asking you to do this little thing for us so that we can do what we do. And so if there are differences in how you prefer to, or how you need documentation done, then by all means, we're here to help you with that.
And you just
Definitely.
want an email?
Yeah, an email will be fine to the active members group.
Okay.
Sound okay?
And at the same time with the email, to say it's coming, I can say, please email me.
Yeah, absolutely. Please email me. Please draw from our prepay. Any form of payment that we offer. I guess those are the only two, right? Yeah. Please.
And a couple of questions. One is with the military call-up.
Mm-hmm.
We have one gentleman that is actually getting his gap payment every 3 months rather than at the end of the time period. Is it confusing to your organization that we make him active for a pay period and then the very next pay period we go in and make him inactive because he's military call-up? And then in 3 months, we do one check for him
Thank you. You're going to want to speak to this one.
and we make him active again on
It,
temporary basis?
it doesn't confuse the system.
Well,
So,
it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is your best practice?
That's a great question. And again, for those who didn't maybe not heard the question is tied to military leave, and sounds like employer offers a gap payment in between the time frame that they're out to continue to help keep them whole. From our perspective, again, going back to statute and going back to our operations, if someone's on military leave, someone's on a non-contributory status. So we want you to keep them in that non-contributory status during their entire service, military service. Because on the back end, there are statutes, both from our perspective on what the contribution requirement is, as well as there's the USERA issue, where if they don't come back under USERA rules, you have no obligation to deal with that issue. So from our perspective, we want you to keep that person in a leave without pay status during the entire military service. Upon their return, then reach out to us. Let's talk through what that service was. Was it a presidential call-up? Was it non-presidential call-up? So then we can work with you on what the contribution requirements are from both the employer and the employee perspective. And then we can work through the adjustments that need to be processed, whether through our portal or whether on the back end through our manual adjustment process that we have internally at our agency. So that would be the best practices. Keep them in that non-contributory status during that entire leave period.
Upload them because they do not want to leave those funds sitting out here in limbo. They want those funds
in the system.
showing as a contribution.
And you're saying who they, you mean member?
No, well, the member and the employer both.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, because under our system, not only our system operationally, but truly under statute, there's no contribution requirement while that person is on leave. It is at the point that they return. So,
Because we run into the same situation with like, holiday time. There are certain floating holidays that they have to have used within a time frame. And if they happen to be gone
actually qualified for contribution,
Contribution.
and yet they're on military call-out. So are we to hold that along with the other?
I would say at this point, yeah, that's that very complicated process. What I would just state at this point would be an outreach to our office, and let's talk through that. Because to me, that sounds like that might be just a manual adjustment on the back end instead of putting someone in a status then not in a status when technically they are still on military leave, and we need to account for that time frame within our systems so that when they actually do return, we account for their contributions appropriately. So I would say in those instances, why don't you do an outreach to our active members group, and anyone on our active members group, including Larry, will be more than happy to walk you through the process. And it sounds, in my opinion, that sounds like that would be more of a back-end adjustment process that we would want to handle outside of our portal, just because of that weird nuance. But good question. Another question right there.
Kind of going to that military leave.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
So, if can you possibly allow the employees, let's say that they have vacation and plus the military time that we pay them, to spread it out throughout the time they're leave? So they're really not in an inactive status because they continue to get paid. They're not getting paid a full check, but they're spreading out, let's say the 320 or whatever amount of hours. If we know that they're going to be deployed for 9 months or whatever it is, can we allow them to spread that out? The contributions are going to be a lot smaller, but there's still not a gap on their contributions.
You could technically do that, but then again, you run the risk on the back end of now you're going to have to go back and yet do more adjustments on those pay periods because you have to make them whole, because those prior pay periods were just small contributions, which on the back end at retirement, if that isn't accounted for and addressed, may affect their high 3 if that time period is their high 3, and we're only seeing these partial contributions. So again, from our perspective, when it comes to military service, it is a non-contributory status until the point that they return, and then let's talk about how do we account for compensation, how do we account for contribution requirements under statute. But to answer your question, it wouldn't stop you. You could technically keep them in that leave, in that active contributing status to give those partials. But then you run those risks on the back end. Some additional questions? Yes. It's okay.
Warm out.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing we
Yeah,
finished the
we're-
contribution presentation so we can talk about
It's
this.
like a general question. I'm new to the public sector, and so I reached out to Don when I first started, but he was on vacation, then I was out, and it's been crazy. So I haven't had a chance to actually do any sort of training or onboarding or anything like that, and I was just kind of wondering what the process normally is. I'm not the local board secretary. We have a separate, local board secretary, but I am the human resources manager.
Mhm.
And I do have a lot. My team has a lot of questions.
Yeah.
That I don't.
Let Robert speak to that one. That one's all yours.
Great question. Well, as you probably know, Don has retired. So we are in process of trying to fill that local board coordinator and training outreach position. But in the interim, my suggestion would be an outreach to Phil Coleman. Phil would be definitely a great resource to help with onboarding and help with an understanding of the system. He himself is going on year number 2 with us, but he comes with 20 plus years of pension experience. And then, of course, I'm always happy to help out as well, because in a prior role, I also used to do local board training and outreach. So that would be your first stop, is why don't you do a outreach to Phil. Additional questions? No?
Guys know everything.
All right. Well, I just kind of want to give you, as we close up here, because I know we're getting ready for the lunch period, just to kind of talk through a little bit about our systems moving forward. As you all know, especially for some of you who have been doing this role, your roles for quite some time, in 2017 is when we really launched this new portal and this new contribution process, which, as we all know, was was an arduous task on everyone's account, and we appreciate all of your patience through that process, and it continues to be a process of enhancements and improvements. And as a system, we realized that pretty quickly that there is a lot of opportunity for growth in that process. We went from, just for a little history for you all, we went from a legacy system that was developed out back in 1996 to trying to launch a brand new system within a year time span and launching it in 2017, which kind of created the clunkiness. And so we as an organization, as an agency, looked back and reflect about that process and how do we better improve that process. And as of last year, as an agency, we have implemented a new methodology with respect to our development process. And we are, for those of you who might be familiar with Agile and Scrum teams and things of that sort when it comes to development, we've taken on that task. And over the last year, we've implemented that program. So as Larry talked about, it's an opportunity for us to look at priorities and look at our systems and how do we improve our systems and take a more agile approach to it. And we're doing it internally with some of our internal systems to get them to where they need to be so that we can then translate that to our external systems in terms of our portals and so forth. So we appreciate your patience through that process, and we continue to work through that as we continue on, because we do know that the portal itself does have opportunities for improvement. Things such like our employee lookup functions and some of the validation process with the contributions, because it may not always be really self-evident that, hey, what I'm uploading is really what I'm going to get invoiced for, and why are these numbers not matching? And then we have all these back-end issues with respect to payments that were made or credits that were taken and not taken and so forth. So again, we appreciate your patience through that process, but as an agency, we did recognize that there was that opportunity for improvement, and we are taking those steps as an agency to implement a better process when it comes to our systems. And hopefully over the next several years, you all will be able to see those improvements on your end through your processes as well. So we thank you very much. But if there are no other questions, I think we might be breaking out a little bit early for lunch. Yes, Tracy.
I just have one. So could you talked a little bit about the enhancements. Can you just give like a summary of the things, of the enhancements that we will be seeing?
Well, some of the things that we are currently looking at and beginning the development process on is, one, that employee lookup function. Because I know from an employer perspective, that would really help out, especially when you are bringing on laterals, to know, do they have an association in the plan? And if so, what tier are they? Because we all know that there's 3 different tiers that they could be in. And if they're in tier 3, are they DB, are they DC? And if they're DC, what's their rate? And all that fun stuff. So that's one of the things that we are currently, as part of our Agile team, looking at and developing and trying to improve upon. The other issue is with respect to our demographic process. And our demographic process right now is a one-off. So that means, especially for our larger employers, you're hiring multiple people in a class. You have to hire firefighter 1, firefighter 2, firefighter 3. If you want to have multiple people on leave without pay, you have to do individually. So we're working through to get a process where you can do file uploads of statuses for hires, for status changes and things of that sort. So those are some of the projects that we're currently underway, which are 2 big ones. Yeah, and from an employer perspective, on the external, those are the 2 big things that we know are issues that need to be addressed, and we're working towards better improving that. So, great question, Tracy. Well, great question. No, absolutely. So the way our Agile and Scrum team works is we work in sprints, in 2-week sprints. And so we are looking at this project in terms of, okay, how do we get from point A to point B? And we actually just finished a major project internally with respect to our refunds and processing refunds, which in my mind is not a huge complicated process. And just to give you the the time frame in which that literally took about 5 months, 5 to 6 months to get from point A to point B in our refund process from going from our old legacy system to our new system. So given that, I think these two projects here, we're probably looking at minimum for the file upload process, probably about 2 months, 2 to 3 months for that process. And then for the employee lookup process, probably, I would say, 3 to 6 months potentially on getting that to a place that really provides value for you all. So you're welcome.